Hi everybody, my name is Jen. Like she said, we're from Sacred Heart University. It's located in Connecticut. It's a really small school. We only have about 4,000 students. It's like 1,000 per class. So in our individual classrooms, we have anywhere from 10 students to maybe 25 max. So I'm going to be a senior this year in the fall, and I'm a math major in the education program. It's a 5-year education program that will give you your master's in education at the end. Also, Nicole, your turn.
Hi everyone, I'm Nicole. I will also be a senior coming up in the fall. I'm also a math major and in the education program, so we travel in the same circle. I'm actually from New Jersey, so Jen's just going to explain kind of what math classes we have taken.
So far, before we took this IBL proofs course, we took Calculus 1, 2, 3. We've also taken linear algebra, and then while we were taking this proofs introduction to proofs course, we were in differential equations. Since having that class, we have taken geometry and topology. What else? Statistics, and what was the last one? Abstract algebra.
So like Jen said, when we were taking this course, we were taking differential equations at the same time. And then we were also taking this in the spring of sophomore year. So basically, just the rest of our presentation, I'm going to explain how our typical kind of day was in our IBL proofs course, along with kind of how the grades came about. Then Jenna's going to explain some advantages and disadvantages that we found from taking the class, and then we're just going to explain kind of how it helped us now that we're a year removed from it. And then hopefully we'll have some time for questions afterwards. So typically the course was run, we had it twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays, and it was an hour and 15 minutes each class. Like Jen said, we had about 10 students in this class, so we were all kind of tight-knit. We knew all each other. We were talking to each other. The only rule for the class was we could not use any outside resources, no internet, no nothing. We could use our book, the 10 students in the class, as well as our professor. The textbook itself wasn't really much of a textbook. It was basically just a list of all definitions, theorems, and propositions. Nothing was done out for us. Our goal for the end of the semester was to have a full, complete written proof for every single theorem in our book. The book was about 30 pages mixed in with all the definitions we needed. We also just on the first day got a list of about 10 pages of do's and don'ts of proofs writing, just to kind of help us along. So basically, the class itself, your grade came from your daily homework, your weekly homework, and then we had 2 tests plus our final exam. So basically, our weekly homework came about once we did 3 or 4 sets of daily homework problems. Our professor would pick maybe 6 or 7 of the problems that we had done for daily homework. We would have to pick 2 of them, write them up, full, complete proofs, and then hand those in, and those would be graded on a scale of 1 to 4. 4 being you had the proof completely correct, nothing was wrong with it. 3, maybe you were missing a couple things here and there. Maybe the style of writing your proof was a little off. 2, you were missing some key informations, but were definitely on the right track. And 1 is if you just were completely wrong. Your daily homework was graded just on a scale of check, check plus, and check minus. So you got to check if you did it, and that was really what you were aiming for. You were aiming for the check plus if you got everything completely right, but it was fine if you didn't have those check pluses. Check minus is if you were missing a proof or if you just didn't do one. So what you would do is you get your daily homework assigned. You were required to write them all. Usually there was about 10 proofs for the daily homework, depending on what the section was. Sometimes the sections were easier. You could fly through the proofs. Sometimes the sections took a little bit longer. So then we would come into class. The only thing you needed for class was your daily homework. You would go into the back of the room. You would grab a different color marker, so you could only write in that marker for the class because you had to be able to differentiate between what you had done for homework, what you were doing in class. You would mark your homework as you were going along. It was fine if you had a lot of markings. You would sign up for what proofs you thought you had gotten correct, and then you would sign up to present them. What you would have to do, you had to have had a certain amount of presentations by the end of the class, by the end of the semester. So you would present the class, nobody could say anything while the presenter was speaking. All you had to do was wait till he or she was done. They would have to explain how they got the proofs, how they were connecting ideas, and then they would open the floor. The teacher really didn't speak with us unless we were completely stuck. So it was kind of our jobs to facilitate the class discussion. You couldn't say to the person presenting, I did the proof this way, you're wrong. You had to kind of ask them like, oh, maybe how did you connect these two ideas? Because again, maybe they're just thinking about it differently than you were. If there were problems, if there was like a bunch of proofs in a row that were kind of the same type of problem, we didn't go over every single proof, those would probably be assigned for your weekly homework. Then we had take-home tests, like we said, 2 take-home tests, and then 1 cumulative final with the take-home portion as well as the in-class portion. This was probably the hardest class I've ever taken, but it was definitely the most rewarding because I could see, especially now removed from it, how well I actually understood the material and understood the proofs and the concept of the proof. So we honestly couldn't have thought how to take this course a different way, and we're really glad that we did. So Jen's now just going to explain some of the advantages and disadvantages from our perspective from the way this course was run.
Also, we have such a small school that since there was only 10 students in the class, it was the only section of proofs offered at that time. Overall, we feel that there are a lot more advantages to this method, especially with this type of course, the proofs course, than disadvantages. So I'm going to go through the advantages first. I'll explain some disadvantages, and then maybe some suggestions that could help lessen the disadvantages. So first of all, there are some obvious advantages. First of all, it helped you with your public speaking. It's funny because before this, I would have never been able to get up in front of a crowd of even 5 people without my voice shaking and wanting to cry. So I'm in front of you today, changed woman. And another one was that it encouraged participation. Again, I've always been shy in classrooms my whole life, and I would kind of just sit in the back. In this class, you couldn't really do that. You had to participate. If you didn't understand something, you had to participate. And if I had something correct, it encouraged you to help out the other students. So participation in other classes, even after this, has skyrocketed. I'm no longer afraid to ask questions in any of my classes. Also, it really enforced rereading, proofreading, and just really going through all your work. When you were working on your own, you might think you had it completely correct, but after rereading and going through, you realize, oh, maybe I should change this, and you definitely wanted to do that because when you got up on that board, you really wanted it to be as correct as possible so that you wouldn't have as many questions. Also, it really helped with your time management skills. With the problem set of 10 problems, some of the proofs were really long, so you really had to like set aside time, and I remember looking at some of the proofs and being like, yep, no way, no idea where to start. And I would be taking a shower and all of a sudden, wait a second, I get it now. So it taught me that you're not gonna be able to sit down and do them all at once. You're gonna need to separate them, which leads into the procrastination part. It's pretty much impossible to procrastinate in this type of method. If you waited until the last day to try to work on anything, you weren't gonna get it done. If you at least, when you got the homework assigned to you, it was best to at least look at the problems and the theorems that you were assigned that day, just so that you could start thinking about them and maybe something would come to you when you were just talking with your friends or in the middle of the night. You couldn't procrastinate. Also, a really important part of this class was that it taught me that it's okay to be wrong and it's okay to make mistakes. When I was up on the board, I thought that I was going to be correct most of the time, otherwise I wouldn't have signed up for that particular problem. But I wasn't embarrassed when my own peers pointed out my mistakes. I knew that it was okay and that they were there to help me and that I would do the same for them, which kind of leads into the constructive criticism part. I know I'm a coach, so I also constructively criticize my players, and it's not a good thing to say, no, you're wrong, this is what you should have done. This class taught you to ease into it, and as a future teacher, that's really important because when I ask a question to the class and a student answers confidently and it's wrong, I'll be able to direct them and try to help them reach the answer themselves and say, well, you're on the right track here, but how do you think this could have gone a different way? And try to lead them to the answer themselves. And finally, the best part of this class is that it really taught you to think. And it got you thinking probably more than any other class I've taken in my life. If you didn't think, like you couldn't just sit there and memorize the proofs, you really had to think on your own, and that's really helped us in the future. We'll talk about that later. Some disadvantages now. It was very, very time consuming. As a student athlete also, that was very difficult. I was in my own season. I play softball. It's a spring sport. We took the class in the spring. I had a lot going on. Also, we were taking differential equations at the same time, which was also a very time-consuming subject. So sometimes we had a lot of proofs, and it was really overwhelming, which leads into the second disadvantage, frustration. It was very frustrating. Just if you had a proof and you were looking at it, or a theorem, and you just had no idea where to start. And sometimes your classmates wouldn't either, and there was only 10 of us, so it was likely that 10 of us wouldn't know where to start. That was really hard because it kind of like, at times I felt like a failure. Math has been my life since I was little, and taking this course, it was the first time I ever felt like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. And that was really hard to deal with. Also, a disadvantage is if you don't have students that are in the right mindset. You have to have students in the right mindset. So, for example, I'm not sure if this type of method would work in, say, a college algebra class or pre-calculus where you have students of all different kinds of majors with all different kinds of backgrounds, because if you're not a math major, you might not really care to know the knowledge. You're not interested, so why do I care if I can figure out this problem? And I'm just gonna take the easy route, which there isn't really an easy route with this method, which also leads into the different paces. If you do have a class of all math majors, our 10 students in our class, we were all math majors. We've pretty much taken every class together since freshman year. But some of us moved at different paces with different topics. So, for example, I would excel in a topic that she wouldn't, and vice versa. So when she got up to the board and she flew through a proof, she completely understood it, and I was just like, whoa, wait a second, hold on. That was kind of hard, and she would try to explain it to me, didn't always work. And then on the other way around, if you had someone go up to the board to present that thought they had gone the completely correct direction, I have everything right, and you're looking at them, and it's just, you know, in your heart, you talk to the teacher, you did out the proof, and you know that everything on the board is just not right. Sometimes it could be hard to correct them, and in a timely fashion. We would spend, I think there was one proof in our subset topic subject that we spent like 3 class periods on, and that was really frustrating because I know that Nicole had that down and she understood it completely, so she sat through 3 classes of just, I already know this. And she tried to help people, but it was hard. Finally, because of that, the whole 3 days on one thing, you can't cover all angles. It's impossible to cover all angles. Some theorems have multiple ways to prove going about it, and so if Nicole was up at the board presenting something one way and I did it a different way, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm totally wrong, but I wasn't, and I didn't know that until I handed it in and got it back, but there was no way for us to go over both different ways, so some students who may have not gotten the proof right, they might have thought that my way was easier, but I didn't have time to present that, so they only knew Nicole's way. Some suggestions, time limits. I think it's a really good idea to set a time limit on how long a student can present a theorem or proof, and as a class discussion, because we would spend hours discussing and trying to correct a student's proof. Eventually you need to say, all right, you know what, don't think they're gonna get this one, and the professor would then explain it. That would help a lot, I think, in terms of being able to cover more subject material. Also, the homework amounts. It's really important to make sure that you look at the topic and how many you're assigning, because we had some sections that I was done in like an hour, and it was easy. And then there were other I just didn't have time to complete them, and it was really frustrating and really difficult. So definitely knowing the subject and knowing kind of the difficulty, kind of hard. Different students struggle with different things, but it's definitely, if it's a longer proof, maybe don't assign 10 of them. Finally, I don't recommend using this course if it's a large class with how do I explain this? With like non-math majors, like I said before. I don't know how well it would work. That's my opinion. Maybe it would work, but I can't imagine. We had one student in the class who was a math major, but not really by choice. He just did it because he was good at it. He didn't really care that much. And yeah, he dropped out. So, anything else? I guess we will now discuss how it's helped us since taking the course.
Okay, so immediately following this course, in the fall semester, we were in geometry as well as probability and statistics 1. And the biggest thing I noticed in geometry was because from the proofs course, we moved into a class where we had split down the middle the kids who had taken proofs IBL style and the kids who had taken proofs the previous year and they weren't using IBL. So when we got to tests and stuff like that, some of the test questions in geometry were proof-based, and the biggest common complaint that the professor got was, this isn't math, we're just memorizing the theorem to regurgitate it on the test. And I totally disagreed with that assessment of the exam because I understood, coming from the IBL background, I understood where the proof was coming from. So I had a better grasp and a better understanding of where they were getting this proof, what direction the proof needed to go. So I didn't have to sit there and memorize the proof word for word. I could basically rewrite the proof in my own words and how I understood it because of the way this proofs course was taught. I knew I had to come up with the proofs from scratch on my own. Like I said, we were only given the definition, so you were given 3 definitions, and then the proof, it was like, prove this theorem. So I had to use those 3 definitions that were just covered and write my own proof from beginning to end without really any assistance. So when it came time for those tests in geometry, I knew how to go about understanding where this was coming from and what direction it had to go in.
So also in geometry, our homework was assigned a little differently than we were used to. We had kind of not the usual textbook. It was more of an actual math reading book that you would use for research. And our professor would assign us a chapter before he would teach it. So he would say, assign chapter 3 for homework, and then the next day we would come into class and we would go over chapter 3. So you didn't know chapter 3 until you read it that night for homework. And a lot of the students that didn't take the IBL proofs course or any IBL course at all didn't really understand how to read math, because we all know math is a totally different language. And we were able to look at the textbook and not get frustrated when we didn't understand the first thing we read. We knew that eventually we could work it out and it would come to us, and that was something that we learned through the IBL method.
And then in statistics, because our statistics class was mainly math majors, but we had some computer science majors in there. The math majors that were in there mostly had taken the proofs course, the IBL style, and then you had this the science ones that didn't have to take proofs. So when our professor was going over, we had to cover a lot in probability and statistics. So she would shorthand things, or maybe she would just skip around a little bit, say it out, but maybe not write it out on the board. And some of the students in the class had some problems with that and weren't quite able to go back into the textbook and reread the proof to kind of fill in the missing bubbles, or understand even the shorthand expressions, because it was so engraved in our brain how to write these proofs out word for word and use the symbols instead of writing it out. So we knew what she was talking about on the board even if she didn't write it.
This past semester we took abstract algebra. I really struggled in this class. She didn't at all, but it was a really difficult class for me, just concept-wise. So when we got the homework, it was, again, a set of 10, some exercises, some proofs here and there. And if I hadn't had the IBL background, I would have looked at the homework and said, no way, I have no idea what I'm doing, I can't do this. But I learned through the IBL method when I looked at the first problem and I was like, oh gosh, here we go. I have no idea how to do this. Move on to the next one. Maybe that will help you solve the first one. And that's a huge thing that I learned. And also with the tests in this abstract course, like I said, I didn't always understand the actual content, but when there would be prove this theorem, and she would list out the theorem on a test, because of the IBL method, I was able to say, okay, I know this, and I know this, so let me write that down. And now let me dissect that. What does that mean? Okay, I also know that I need to say what I want to show. We always start with, let this equal this is what I know, and now in order to prove this is what I want to show. So I was able to try to get at least partial credit on certain things, and it did help me have a better understanding of at least where to start. I never left a problem blank, even if I didn't have a clue what the content was actually saying. I never left a problem blank, and that was something that I learned in the IBL method, was to try. At least try, give it a shot. You never know what you might come up with.
And then outside of math, where this has come into play, we're both in the education program. So the biggest part of education, especially the first class we were in, first day, he goes, you're going to have a 45-minute presentation that you're going to have to do by the end of the semester. And most of our class kind of just groaned and rolled their eyes and was like, oh gosh, what do I do now? But we were used to it from the way this class is taken. We were used to being up in front of the class and teaching. When Jen was talking about the subsets, I was the person that got stuck up at the board for 3 days trying to explain this proof. So I knew what it was like to stand in front of a classroom for an hour and 15 minutes and try to explain things and try to even go about it different ways to try to maybe get people to understand something. So that kind of helped. And then also just like learning to question things. This kind of goes back to abstract algebra. The people who spoke in abstract algebra, asked questions, were the people who were in our proofs class. We were the ones who we didn't understand on the board when she was writing out a proof. We didn't just take everything she said and was like, oh, okay, let me just copy it down and remember it. No, we asked questions and we were like, wait, why did you connect these two ideas? How did you connect these two ideas? Maybe we didn't understand what definition she was getting something from, and we weren't afraid to stop and ask. I know me and Jen and one of our other friends were the loudest people in that class. We always stopped her, but it was better that way because we were getting the better understanding, and when it came time for the test, that really showed.
In a non-education aspect, from a teacher aspect, as a student aspect, I took a course in economics. I am not a business major. I know nothing about the business world, but I was the only non-business major in the class, and my professor kind of just assumed that we all had somewhat of a business background. And that was really difficult for me because she would make a lot of references and connections to things that I never heard before in the stock market, for example. No idea. But everybody else did because they had all taken introduction to finance and all those kinds of things, and I had never taken that before. And without the IBL method, I probably would have just sat back and said, oh, this teacher's terrible, she doesn't know what she's doing, she doesn't even care about me, and I probably would have blamed her for failure. And I know there are students out there that say, oh, well, my teacher is bad. That's why I didn't do well in this course. I don't understand this because my teacher doesn't know how to teach. That can never be an excuse anymore because the IBL method taught me how to do things out for myself. So there are going to be times where not all teachers are that great. That happens. I hope I'm not one of them, but I can work it out myself. And it's nice to have that confidence that even after I graduate and I'm not in class anymore, I don't need a teacher to learn. I can pick up a book and I can teach myself because I will never stop thirsting for knowledge. I can't imagine ever not taking a course again, but I love learning about math and I can't imagine that ever ending. So even when I'm not in college, I will pick up a book and I will read it for myself because I know how to.
So basically, this was the most difficult class we've ever taken, like I said before, but it's also the most rewarding class. We've never come I've never gotten an A on my transcript before and been so excited about it, because I knew that I earned that A, and I knew that I got that A because I understood the material fully. It wasn't that I was able to memorize a couple things for a test and write it down, and we just had such a better understanding of the proofs, and I think that really, really helps, especially now that we're in upper level math, because we have one more main course to take, and everyone's told us it's all proof-based, so we feel better about it because of the way that class was taken. So are there any questions for us at all?
Daniel Kiddick. So I believe, Jen, you mentioned that frustration was a disadvantage. I wondered if y'all could, would you see the frustration and working through the frustration ultimately being a good thing, or do you have a suggestion in how to make it better?
Well, in college, you have a lot of stressors, as we would know firsthand. There's a lot going on. There's the social aspect, and there's the sport aspect for myself. There's the learning, and then it's sleeping. So in terms of frustration, it was frustrating because I didn't have time to do everything. I had to pick and choose. Frustration definitely was a good thing at some point, because it meant that I cared. And it was kind of nice to know, like, okay, I'm frustrated because I really want to get this right and I care. But it also, at times, was very discouraging, the frustration, because I would sit there and try to work this proof, and I worked so hard, and I didn't always get it on my own. And that was really hard, because sometimes I felt like I was failing. So in terms of frustration, it's both good and bad.
Well, I liked the frustration actually is what led me, I think, to feel so satisfied when I got that grade, because I knew how frustrating it was, and to be able to say at the end, be able to work through it and do it, I think that's what made it even more satisfying and rewarding in the end.
So, Milos Savic, University of Oklahoma. I have a question about, from a female perspective, taking an IBL course, did you feel that there were any differences between your other courses, for example, the differential equations course and the IBL course?
Yeah, they were actually completely opposite. Taking them the same semester was really interesting, because I would go from the differential equations course, where I would just be sitting there trying to copy the notes as fast as possible because our teacher spoke really fast, to going to the IBL course where it was kind of like more laid back in a sense. But I think it kind of helped me in both, because when I started learning in the IBL course and learning to question things, I kind of brought that into my differential equations course. And when I didn't understand something in differential equations, like I said, I wasn't afraid to stop the professor and be like, listen, where did you get this from? Whereas maybe I wouldn't have done that if I didn't have the IBL course at the same time. So maybe there would have been a couple things in differential equations that I didn't quite grasp the understanding that I did.
Another different aspect of it was the IBL method really brought us close together. So in the other courses that weren't IBL, we kind of turned them into IBL as a collective group. We got together and we worked on them. We did them our own. And I remember we would even, okay, finish tonight's homework. What are we doing tomorrow? Let's look at that now. Because we were so used to it. So I will never go back to the old ways. I will never memorize anything again. I will always understand it. So it's very, very, very different.
Josiah Kreutz, University of Nebraska, Omaha. I was curious, regarding collaboration outside the class, did you guys do that a lot? You alluded to that a little bit, but helping each other if you didn't understand something outside the class and homework, and do you think that is important? And would you do it differently than how it was done in your class?
Well, actually, when we were taking that course, I don't think we collaborated as students as much as we do now, but I think that kind of helped us now that we collaborate even more. Like, we'll be sitting in we have our own math conference room. We'll be sitting there for hours before our abstract algebra final. We were all in there and collaborating. What I did a lot with this proofs course is I was just in the professor's office hours, so there might have been 2 or 3 students in there with me. We weren't really collaborating as students, more with the professor, but maybe I think a little bit I would have probably probably collaborated a little bit more with the students, especially in the beginning, because once I started collaborating with the professor, I saw my grade go up, so I think I would have started maybe a little bit earlier.
For me, I was never in the professor's office. Her office hours never worked out with my schedule, so here and there, the only help I really had in that class was what I would ask Nicole when she went to office hours. I would say, hey, I'm really confused on this. Could you ask Professor Stockton for me? And then she would tell me, but ever since that class, we have gotten together like every test, every homework. It's not even a question of if we're getting together, it's when. And we just kind of show up and it just happens.
So Jeb Collins. So my question is kind of about the marketing of the IBL method. The professor explaining at the beginning of class what she's doing. I'm just kind of wondering, how well did the professor do that at the beginning, and how important do you think that is as a student?
I think it was extremely important because from day one, she had us in the mindset that this was going to be different than any other class we had ever taken, and that there were going to be times where we were going to be frustrated, but we just had to continue to work through it, and especially to use her as a resource and not be afraid to use her as a resource. I just remember her coming into class and she said that one rule, not to use any outside resources, and I was like, well, what if I can't reach you? Like, we couldn't even use any other professors in the math department. Like, we could only use her, and we could only use the 9 other students in class. So I was very nervous going into it, but then as I kind of worked through it, but I think by her putting us in that mindset that it's going to be different, you're going to struggle, I think that was very helpful, because when I did start struggling, I was like, all right, this is okay, like, just relax, like, go to her. She said use her, and then once I did that, I saw things started to get a little bit easier.
I know for myself, when she first explained, she very thoroughly explained the rules of the class, saying you have to ask questions when students are presenting. You can't tell them where to go, you have to ask them. And I remember being like, oh my gosh, I don't know how I'm gonna do that. And also when she said that she would be in the back of the room only helping if we need it, I was kind of skeptical, as they had said. I was like, why are you even here then? What are you doing as a professor? I don't understand. We're doing all the work. You're just sitting there watching us struggle. And there were times, that 3-day long proof, and she sat back and we were going in the wrong direction and we were like, come on, help us out. But in the end, she was there the whole time. I hadn't realized it in the beginning, and I was really angry at first and I didn't like it at all. But I've come to the realization that she was there the whole time. If I ever needed help, I went to her. And when we did get stuck, she facilitated, she led us in the right direction. And it was so rewarding. I wouldn't do it any other way. Thank you.